Hi, I'm Lisanne Miller with W Cushing and Company, and we're here today to talk about combining dyed and textured wool to create unique and beautiful flowers. I want to thank Rug Hooking Magazine for this opportunity, and also don't forget to look at the videos about all the celebration winners and get your celebrations magazine. So to recap, let's go over a little bit about the flowers. In here, these are the flowers we're talking about, a cabbage rose, and we are talking about it right in this context. So we're talking about the cups and using the dark, using a texture for the dark, and going with a medium and a light, and using the textures and the lights to create the rose, okay? And then here is another case of where this is actually a texture in here creates the cup, and we go out with the texture and go out with the lighter colors, a little bit of a softer look, and then we come back in here with the centers and in the dark, and then that will create the cup that creates the rose. So we have our pattern here, which is called the Rose Tray. It's a Ruth Hall pattern, and it's a great little pattern. It's not overpowering if you haven't hooked flowers before. It lets you practice 3 different flowers, your leaves, and also your scrolls, which we've done a video on scrolls before. So, first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure where you're going to put your dark lines and where you want to put your textures. So as you can see, I've taken my marker, okay, and I've put it in so I can see it. With this darker line, that's where I know I'm going to put my texture, and I may filter some out into the outer petals, not in all of them. And since these are twin roses, I'm going to take this one right here like this, and I'm going to do that as well, because if you get lost while you're hooking this, you have this one over here as a guide. So I always like to do the 2 on at the same time. Also, this one we might want to change up a little bit. We might want to put our texture out here to give it a definition. So we're going to put this and define this just like that, and a few little lines in there, and we're ready to go. So let's talk about picking colors for a red rose. We'll start with a traditional red rose. These are 2 dyed wools that would make a beautiful red rose. They are a spot dye. The spot dye has highs and lows in it, so as you're hooking it, it will create highs and lows without having to shade. And this one is Better Than Roses, and as you can see, it's got all nice little colors in it, and this is Santa Suit Red. A texture that we can pair with it is our Geo Red. Now a lot of times when we pair a Geo Red with Santa Suit Red, that may be all we need, but we still need a defining line like the one that we highlighted on the rose. This blends in a little too much and you may lose your definition. This happens a lot of times with red roses and also with poppies. And somebody had emailed into me about talking about poppies and getting definition. So if you're having trouble and you want to use these 3 but you still want a defining line, this is where you bring in a nice chocolate brown. This texture is Whiskey Barrel. It's nice, it's rich, and if we didn't want to use this per se, and we wanted to use Santa Suit Red, we wanted to use Geo Red because we have all the shades of color, then our defining line that we just highlighted would be done in the Whiskey Barrel. And the green very, very lightly shows up, but that's okay. You shouldn't let that bother you because you have your leaves there. And for one moment now, I'm going to take a minute, and we didn't really talk about leaves like we should have last time. As you're hooking your flowers, if you have an inch or 2 left over, you save that and you put that in a little cup, a little bag, and that becomes your veins. And that lets your veins become defined. So when your veins become defined, as you can see, this is one of the values of this rose, it ties it into the flowers. And then you can hook your leaves in any of your leftover greens or greens that you chose for the project. As you can see here, you have a dark green, a medium green, and then a mint green. Some are textured and some are dyed. This one here has the dark green, medium green, mint. This has a tip of yellow, which matches the yellow in one of the other flowers to give it a little bit of a turn. So it's very important that you tie your leaves in by using all your leftovers from all your flowers and putting them in with your veins. It makes it very nice. It allows you to help you to pick your greens, and don't just lock yourself into one color of a green for the leaves. And we'll go over some choices later on. So back to our red rose. So if that's one choice for your red rose, but you really like that these are a duller, these are a more orange red, and these two look really good together. You can come in here and you can use this still, but this is a little bit harsher of a line and you may not like that. That may be too harsh for your eye. But if you wanted it to fade in a little more and you still wanted to use the brown, then we go to size of cut. You would change your cut to a size smaller so it wasn't as predominant. Or in this case then, you can bring in the Geo Red, but you'd only use this dark stripe. You wouldn't use these two. These two blend too much with what you already have. So there's a red rose, but not all roses are red. So let's talk about a yellow rose. This is our sunburst, and this has a little bit of a blue purple, a brighter yellow. So you have two values in the spot dye already. And a great texture, which most people do not think about, is guacamole. Guacamole is a nice green. It picks up. It's got a little bit of plum in there, and that purple ties in with sunburst very nicely. But you may want a pop of color, and you may want to have a little more definition. So here is Marigold Magic, and this would be in between as your texture. So these three may go for a yellow rose. But you may say Marigold Magic is a little brown. It's really not what I wanted in my rose. It's not as soft. Then we would go with a Marigold number 2, which has a green cast to it. It is a gold with a green cast. It still goes with sunburst, but it goes excellent with guacamole. So this would be our defining line that we highlighted, and then these two can be the yellow rose. Or if you say, you know, I really don't like either one of those, we can pull in Fields of Gold. And we can have two textures and a dyed piece. So this can be our tips, our light highlights that go up on top like that. We have two values within the sunburst, and this can be our defining line. So this will also create a beautiful, beautiful yellow rose. So not all flowers are defined that way. We have another flower over here that resembles a morning glory, and the morning glory, or any flower you'd like it to be. So within this flower, we have 3 layers. So the inside, which is normally a lighter, much lighter, then we would have another defining line, and then the rim around. So for this piece right in here, I love to use something like confetti. And confetti takes the place of a dyed piece of wool, and it has so much color in it. It's got a little bit of white, it is a light color, it's got purple, blue, orange, yellow, green, red, but they're not predominant. They're just little flecks of color that add movement so that this piece over here is not flat. So it looks like you've used dyed wool, shaded wool, but you're just going to cut this and hook it around. Now your little centerpiece, if you hooked a yellow rose before, Just say you decided to use the sunburst, you can pop this in for your center. You can pop a little piece of guacamole in, fields of gold. Your center here on this flower is the same as the veins in your leaves. It's there. It doesn't need to take over the flower. It can just be something that is part of another flower or just a little piece of something you have left over. When you want to move out into here, and just say you wanted to use a blue, well, we have a bunch of blues here. One of my favorites to use if you're going to make this into a morning glory is Storybook Cottage Sky. This is what we call a dip spot. It has the movement of a spot die and the graduation of a dip die. It goes from dark to light. So you can use the lightest color to come out. This is our center ring. Then we have one little ring. Then we can come out into here. So it looks like you've shaded the piece and you really have just used the one piece of wool. Okay? Or if you wanted to, you could come and make the little line dark and come out lighter, and that would look very well. So suppose you like color. You like a little more pop than that. Well, then we can come into bluebells, and this is bluebells. This is a spot die. Again, it is a dip spot die, and bluebells goes from light to dark. So again, we can use this. This is our center. This could be the line. This could be the outside, just like that, or vice versa. So that gives you a little more pop of color. It looks really nice. They're all washed. They're just different values, but you do get that, and it works perfectly with confetti. Now, if you like more of a purple, and this shows you the versatility of confetti, you can use our periwinkle pop, and this again has darks and lights to it, and you can just go around the outside with that. And periwinkle pop has more of a purple hue to it and would allow you to use different colors in it. So if you didn't want to use dyed wool and you wanted to come out here with another texture and use confetti, well, then we can go with cloud cover. And it's a little bit grayer, a little bit taupier, but you still get the same effect. And you could just use that on the outside line, or you could make a little bit of a line around with fields of gold and come out with that. So with this, you have to make sure that this has a lighter color, so to speak, and then here is your blues if you wanted to make it a morning glory. And it doesn't matter what the center is. It can be yellow, it can be orange. If you have yellow in your rose, you would tie it into here. These little veins here, you might want to make your rose color to tie it in, and then take the blue, if you're using blue here, and put blue into your veins over here across from each other. We have one other flower right here, kind of like a daisy, a regular flower. And for that, if you want to combine and use something very unique for that, the problem is you've got to get your definition in between each petal. So in order to get your definition in between each petal, you can use different colors. Again, you can come in with a texture and not outline your petals like this, but just come in on the lines with a texture and then hook your flower. And maybe once in a while, you can tip the flower. So for that, if you like color, here is Flower Power. Flower Power has a lot of different colors to it. So what you can do is use these two colors for your different petals to go around. And then if you needed to put a texture in between, you can come in with Fields of Gold, and that creates a dividing line, but a soft dividing line. Another soft dividing line would be Fruit of the Loom. And Fruit of the Loom, because we have all these different colors, and it is a herringbone, we can then put that in there as well. So then you can take the stripe and put it in between. And that actually makes that a little more defined and a little bit easier on the eye, but you don't have to worry about losing the petal shape. That's a really easy way to do that. So let me show you how we would highlight that. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to come in here, just like that, like that, like that. So that is where I would really put in my texture or my defining lines. And then, as you can see by me just doing this with the marker, a little bit here and there, the leaves actually, the petals, sorry, actually have definition. Now, just say you wanted this to be an open flower, a blue flower. You can go back in and use our periwinkle pop. You can use Storybook Sky, where you have the lights and the darks in one piece and separate them. But in between here, you're still going to need a defining line. And the defining line could be another dyed piece, but then you could come in here with Cloud Cover and create a beautiful, like a bachelor button, but a beautiful blue flower. Or you can take this end, the darker end, and then just use the lighter in between. But really the texture, as you can tell, gives it a little bit more definition and makes it a little more defined. So that, because it is a texture, doesn't draw your eye or deter from the dyed wools, but enhances them and creates definition. And by doing this, by taking your marker and doing this, you actually help your eye as you're hooking it to decide where the colors should go. Okay? And then in the center, now this is a little different flower because you're coming down like that. So this again can be the confetti, and you may want to come down with color from dark to light and use a dip spot to create that down, just like that. So I have some wool cut, and I'm going to put in my defining line first. And I'm going to put it in with Whiskey Barrel. I'm going to take Whiskey Barrel, and I'm going to put the Whiskey Barrel in. So I would put that in to create my cup. And if I want that cup created, I have to make sure that I have the dark. And the dark is what creates your eye and draws your eye in. So I've started the cup right there, and I've cut some red, some really bright red, a spot dye red. And I'm going to, as you can see, it's got highs and lows in it, and I'm going to put it right next to it. I'm going to pull it up real quick. Okay, so now I've started in with the red rose. And I'm pulling it as high as my defining line. And you can see it's going to start to draw around. Now, I have used a darker red, and I'm going to use a darker red to come up the top with it, just like that. And this is a bit of a wider cut, and I'm putting that in. And you can see how it's starting to shape into a red rose. And then, if I wanted to, I can continue here. Now, if you don't want, and you need this, you need to make sure that it doesn't overpower. This happens to be a 4 cut, and you can hook it lower than your reds, but watch what happens when I hit on the other side. All of a sudden, it gets diminished. It's not as predominant. So if you think that this is too bold at first, make sure you put it in. Make sure that you hook your rose, and if you say, well, you know, it's a little too predominant, okay, so you can come along here, and I'm going to reverse hook real quick, and I'm going to hook it lower. And by hooking it lower, not as high, okay, I'm not hooking it as high, I'm hooking it a tad lower. And I want you to see, and it's up to you how much of this cup you want to create. Okay, so I've hooked it a tad lower. All right, and I'm going to come in here now, and this happens to be Santa's Suit Red, and I'm hooking it in. And by hooking it just a tad lower, you may find it more appealing. And the highs and the lows in the spot die are coming out nicely. And as you can see, the line is starting to disappear. So you have, as I've always said, the tools in our tool belt are the size of our cut, our value, and sometimes it's the height of our loops. So if you wanted it more predominant, you would raise the height of the loops. If you wanted it a lot not as predominant, you want it there, you want people to see the definition, but you don't really want it to stand out, then you just hook it a tad lower and let it recede in. Because then, when you hook the other side, okay, and as I'm getting ready to hook this other side, I can come in, and I'm going to come down with this, and I'll show you another. See, it's coming with all the different colors in the spot die, as you can see. Okay, and then I'm going to come back into here. Okay, and you can go down to a smaller cut. This is just what was cut in my stash, and I was using what was already cut. And you can come down into here. Now you're going to say, well, Lisanne, you just hooked over those little brown lines. Well, I did. And now if you notice, this dark line has faded almost entirely. But afterwards, I can come in, and I left a little bit of room, and I can sneak those lines in. Okay? And by sneaking those lines in, I am getting the definition. So by lowering it, I really faded it in. There should be another value in here, and you can hook another value, a lighter value, and move your way up. But the cup has started, I've put the little lines in, and the rose has started to take shape. Now, I have this little piece, this little funky piece left over. So what I'm going to do first off is, I'm going to come right over here, and I'm going to make sure I don't lose it, and I'm going to put it right in here. Just like that, as a little vein. And while it looks predominant now, when the greens go around it, it will fade. Okay? So by doing it that way, I've got the little piece left over, I immediately put it in so I don't forget or lose it. Now, I want you to look at Confetti. We're going to hook a little bit onto Confetti, and that's Confetti. And I've cut these a little bit larger so that you can see them while we're demoing. This is how Confetti hooks. It hooks just as if it's a little bit of flecks of color here and there. Looks like a dyed piece of wool. Okay, and I don't want my center to be too big, so I may put that in last. I may even tie a French knot in the middle. And so you just keep going around, but you can see just the little flecks of color, just like that. And then I'm not hooking it too neatly, but I just wanted you to see the color. And again, for this pattern, you might want to use a smaller cut. This happens to be an 8 for it, but I wanted you to be able to see what we were doing. So it's a little awkward, but you can at least see it. So you can see the highlights of the colors. It looks like a dyed piece of wool, but it is not. And it is confetti. And then you can ring it in blues and green, whatever color you so choose. Or you could ring it in another texture that we talked about before, which is called the perfect plaid. And the perfect plaid is blue and yellow. And this happens to be, I think, a 6 cut. But if you wanted to, and you wanted to come in here with one row prior to the next, you could just come in here and it would just give you a little bit of a defining line. Again, this is just not precision done, just put into so you can see the colors. And see, by doing that, when you leave little spaces in between, you can hook in between like a zipper. And so the perfect plaid, which we went over about 2 videos ago, adds a nice color. Then you can come out with your dyed piece to show your dyed piece off on the outside. So the perfect plaid actually blends in very nicely. It has a nice look to it. It's blue and yellow with a little bit of green, and it makes a very nice little texture dividing line. And it really does work in to create just a tad of a lip, and then you can come on the outside with one of your darker blues or a nice dyed piece of blue to really give it a pop. And you see you could come out with that on the outside and that would pop it. And the perfect plaid, that's the perfect plaid. And it doesn't matter which way you cut it. You could actually cut it here for the center, here for the line, and then make the outside of your flower really pop. So that is how we combine textured and dyed wool to create a beautiful flower. I hope that's helped you and helped you to pick the colors so that you can create beautifully dyed textured flowers, combine them uniquely. You could make your rose textured and your lines could be a dip dye. There's a million different ways to do this, but at least this gives you the options and some idea of how you'd like to use them. And when you pick your greens for your leaves, a little hint, don't just make it one color. In nature, there's blue-green, yellow-green, dark green, all in one flower or on one bush. So if you do that, you don't have to stick with the same greens. You can combine all different greens, such as we've done over here, into one leaf. And last but not least, when you pick your background, dark, light, whatever you should pick, in order to make your flower really stand up, be sure that you come all the way in. Make sure that your background comes all the way in where it's supposed to, all the way down here. And even in here where it breaks up this petal from that petal to that leaf. And then there's a stem. You don't want to put the stem in, you don't have to. That's more background to come in. The background in this case is your backdrop to make everything come out very nicely. And like I said, if you pick a light background or a dark background, it doesn't really matter, but it does have to come in between here, in between your leaves, and all the way up into here. Because that adds, see, even this little line in here and here, that adds the dimension to make the rose come up. So, I look forward to seeing your creations combining dyed and textured wool, and we will see you again next month. I hope everybody is well and stays well. Thank you.